Thank you very much, Leah. And kia ora koutou. It's great to have you all with us today. And it's my pleasure to host this session where we're having a conversation with Brett Ashley. So I'd just like to start by saying a couple of things about Brett. And I guess I'd start that by saying, in terms of the work that we've done at On Brand Partners over the last 15 to 20 years, not just in New Zealand, but around other parts of the world as well, you meet a surprisingly few number of senior executives who really stand out to you, maybe a couple of handfuls and things. And Brett is really one of those. And from paperboy to butcher, Brett charted an outstanding career over 40 years in the retail sector across Australasia, primarily in New Zealand. He's been a senior executive within the Woolworths New Zealand or Countdown organisation for over 20 years. And during that time, I can tell you, he really honed his leadership skills. I first met Brett around about 10 years ago, not long after we'd completed a piece of work around in-store service transformation for one of UK's leading supermarket brands. We managed to get an introduction, and that led us to doing a couple of pieces of work with him and his team. And by the time he retired from the company in late 2020, Brett was the GM of store operations and supply chain, which meant he was essentially responsible for the bulk of Countdown's 18,000 employees. I guess what immediately struck me about Brett was his ability to genuinely connect with people at a human level. And he's got a real sense of doing the right thing at the right time. And that certainly included the way he worked with us. For example, there was a point where we were on the verge of doing a big piece of work, and for various reasons, Countdown decided that that wasn't the time. And often in those situations, as a supplier or provider of services to organisations, you might get an email or a phone call, but Brett went, a big step further and organised a meeting, came to our offices and sort of talked openly about the situation and the consequences. And that just spoke to us in terms of the character and of the man, of the person. The other thing is, I think, his unbounded energy and determination to drive positive change and improve performance, not just for the organisation, but for the individuals and teams as well. As a leader, he was an exemplar, I think, in terms of providing both support and creating challenge for people and teams. So a really positive, powerful environment for people in which to operate. Often I think the other thing I'd just add at this point is that, when you're working with executives, leaders, you get a sense of what you can offer in terms of improved capability for the organisation. But often the executives see that as something that we need to do with their people. But Brett, again, goes a step further. He immersed himself fully in it and opened his mind to learning as we worked through this. It wasn't just about developing his people, but it was also about developing himself. And what I've subsequently learned is that, I guess the bulk of his career, bulk of his life, he's adopted that sort of attitude. And as a result, he's actually developed a really powerful and comprehensive system for personal planning and performance, both in work and in life. He retired at late 2020, I think about September, Brett, and it's fair to say he hasn't slowed down since then. Most people take it easy in retirement, but rather he's sped up. So he's written a book, which is going to be published in a couple of months' time. It's titled The Key to Unlocking Your Potential. And this will support his new venture, which is called My Purpose, which is an enterprise aimed at giving back, particularly at the level of senior secondary students, helping them to develop their purpose in life and how to plan in order to achieve their own full potential. Just to let you know, we'll be giving a copy of his book away today, even though it's still at the publishers, at the printers. And we'll be giving that to the person who provides the standout question or comment from this. So welcome, Brett. It's a great pleasure to have you with us today. And I thought we might just start a little bit about the book. Congratulations. As Leah's mentioned, having co-authored one myself, I appreciate the time and energy that's gone into it. But love to hear a little bit more about it. In this phase of giving back, what are you hoping the book and the business My Purpose will achieve?
first of all, thank you for that fantastic introduction. And kia ora to everyone. Good morning. Look, it's been a fantastic experience for me to actually have the time to sit down and write a book about my life and my journey in leadership. I basically have always had a goal about giving back, and Paul said I'm very keen on personal planning, and one of my goals is to give back. But when I first put that goal down, the goal was about giving back to my family. And it wasn't until later in life and in part of my leadership journey that I understood I wasn't the most important person in the universe, and that I had to look to share and give back to others as well, not just my family and myself. And so when I retired, as Paul said, in 2020, I took the time and the opportunity to put pen to paper, I suppose. And often during my leadership time with my teams and at forums and conferences, I would ask our team to share their life stories and get our leaders up to share their story and leadership lessons. And I've got to say, they were absolute gems and loved by everybody. But when I finally left, I gave my story. And as a result of that, I'd already started the process, so I carried on. And then as part of that process of writing the story and the leadership lessons, it actually dawned upon me that maybe I'd have an opportunity to do even more in giving back and actually look to do some workshops and pass on that knowledge to others personally, as well as not just the book. And that kind of formed me to think about, well, maybe I could start a business that would help to educate and coach people. In particular, as Paul said, I'm really, really excited about the opportunity to help senior students, those year 12, 13 students that are ready to embark on their journey in life and are starting to really understand who they are and what they want to be. And so I was really excited about that. And that's really what's kind of led me to that. And my purpose was formed as a result of that. And we're looking forward to that opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's really exciting, Brett. And I've been privileged to be able to have a sneaky look at the book in terms of a couple of key chapters. And even I tell you what, if just reading the introduction, it piques your interest. It wants you to read on. So let's talk about a couple of the key concepts which underpin these philosophies. So one of those is how to create volunteers and free your prisoners. So maybe you just want to, and this is relevant to all of us as leaders, regardless of what stage we're at. So maybe you just want to talk a little bit about how you relate to that and what it means.
Well, I kind of picked up later in my leadership, probably 10 or so years ago, about the David Peake model that I use quite a bit in the book. Which is the volunteers and prisoners, or prisoners to volunteers. And it talks, specifically, it's about 4 quadrants, and you get a lot of this in leadership, situational leadership, 4 different quadrants. The quadrant that you're looking for when in culture and in life, I suppose, is to be a volunteer. You want your team to volunteer to be part of your business, to live and achieve its purpose. And same in life. That's what you want to do. You want to volunteer. That'll be in the top right-hand corner, and the bottom right-hand corner then would be the whingers. And you have whingers that basically are the people that feel pretty safe, but actually moan and complain about things, but don't truly volunteer to help them. So it's always a struggle. In the top left-hand side, a bit unsafe actually, are people that we call survivors. And just in life too, you're surviving, just there, getting on day to day, getting through things. So you survive in business that way. You have a lot of people like that. I call them just good enough. They're good enough to be there. They're surviving. And lastly, there's the quadrant that's called the prisoners. And in my life, I felt early on that I was trapped in a home environment that I felt like I was in prison. And I knew I had to set myself free from that prison, but I had to set all the mental things that were trapping me free. And in business, I found that this also applies, that you have, as a leader, you will have prisoners in your environment, people who don't want to be there, but feel trapped and don't feel they can do anything else. And just as I said, in personal life, you've got to find a way to set your personal prisoner mentality free. You have to find a way to set your corporate prisoners free. Because if you don't set them free, they will sabotage everything that you do. And I decided I didn't want to be a jailer. I wanted to, I'd like to give them an opportunity somewhere else. First of all, we try to move them into the other quadrants, but I found that if you didn't set prisoners free in the corporate world, then whingers would become prisoners, and in the end, so would survivors. So to help them create and become volunteers in your business, you have to set your prisoners free.
And what's the key to that? And if we can delve into this a little bit more in due course, Brett. But what's the headline in terms of being able to get people into that volunteer space?
Well, it's about creating belief. You see, and this is really what I'm trying to do personally for people too as well, is to believe in themselves, to believe in their purpose, what they're there for. But when you're in business, you've got to create belief for your business. Why are they there? And why do they feel they need to be there? And why would they, when they come, why would they want to achieve what you want them to achieve? Because if you can't make them believe in that, then you'll never achieve.
Yeah.
And I think that's the fundamental in the leadership philosophy, right? That you have to create belief, and people underestimate it. You can't just write a statement or tell people they got to believe this.
Yeah.
You've got to take actions that they truly believe. And how you do that is by those specific actions. And that's fundamental for us as leaders. Otherwise, quite frankly, you have a big problem culturally with inside an organization.
Yeah, great. Now we've got a question already from Heather. And so Heather's asking, Brett, do you believe that people who are sitting in the prisoner quadrant will always be prisoners in life, or depending on your leadership, you can move between the four leaderships? And I guess you've answered that to some extent. If I could just make a comment myself, I thought one of the really interesting things about David Peake's own explanation of the model is that when people join an organisation, they naturally start as volunteers, right? 99% of them, because you join up to a new organisation, you're there, you're wanting to add value, you're wanting to make a difference, right? So you're in that volunteer space, and often it's a result of the environment around them and the experiences they have through a period of time, which throws them into one of those others. But your thoughts?
Well, simply you have to find out what's created their prisoner mentality. And as you say, I mean, most people, everybody, I think, comes to work to try to do a good job initially. Most of the time, we can stuff that up right from day one for a poor induction, and it's bloody terrible in some instances what happens with induction. And but you have to find out why they've got that mentality, because there is truth in that. And if you can find that, you can stop some of the prisoners. Might be too late for the ones that are already there, I've found, because sometimes that mentality, because here's my view, right? We all fall into one of those quadrants anytime, day or week or year. So you can do it anytime. I fall into the whinger mode. I fall into the survivor mode. I fall into the prisoner mode. It's how long you stay in them that matters.
Yeah.
And if you can catch yourself, or a leader can catch them and save those people, yes, they can come out. But to do that, you've got to understand why they're there.
And I guess, Brett, you've got to spend time with them, right? Which is a key requirement of leadership, is that connection, that regular connection and things.
Well, the number one thing I'd say that I don't believe as leaders we do, or a lot of leaders will not do enough of, is the one-to-one meeting.
Yeah.
And, look, I classic, all right, we'll talk about COVID later. But, when you get under pressure, you stop having a one-on-one with your personal interaction with each individual, your key influences in business and in life. Forget about it personally too as well. If you cannot spend time talking to each other about what you believe in, where you want to go, and how you want to get there, it's a problem. And if you share that, and I call that, and in the book I talk about it's the quality conversations that you have.
Yeah.
Where you've got to understand my way, their way, and your way together, because we all got different beliefs, right? And you've got to find a way to get aligned. But if you don't have a one-on-one conversation, it's over, and you delay it because you don't have time or something else has taken your priority, it quickly falls away and you quickly create these different quadrants of winners, survivors, and prisoners.
Yeah, we firmly believe that as well, Brett, which is, we use the sort of mantra, change happens in the conversation, nothing will change unless you have the conversation. You need to step into that space. And as you say, everyone has a unique perspective because we've all had different experiences along the way, right? We've all done different things. We've come from different backgrounds. So we all have a different perspective. And it's only by opening up that conversation that we can get aligned by utilizing those different perspectives and find a common pathway forward. Another concept in the book, which is a little surprising in some ways, coming from the stereotypical executive out of a supermarket industry, male, etc. So you talk about karma, and the importance of that and your belief in that. So I'm not sure how much you've studied Buddhism and how closely you are to the Dalai Lama, but I'd really like you to talk about that a little bit.
Oh, well, I have studied it quite a bit. I aren't practicing, but I believe in the philosophy of the universe, right? So you've got to start there. And the universe, it operates and attracts in a certain way. And so the law of attraction to me is a fundamental law of the universe that I think is so powerful. And it is a belief that for every action, there's an equal reaction. And I kind of figured out early in life, and people used to say to me, Paul, they used to say, shit, you're lucky, Brett. Look at what you've done. Look at where you've come from. Look at what you do. Oh, you don't seem stressed. How come you're not stress-pressed? You're pretty lucky. And I go, I don't believe in luck. And I don't. I believe that all outcomes are a result of the inputs or actions we have taken. And so, it's kind of like you've got to say to yourself that, if an event happens in life, and it can be terrible, right? You've got to adopt this attitude, and this is kind of where I come from, is I'm 100% responsible for that event. And people go, well, how can you be? Jacinda's making the rules for you, mate. You can't decide. And I say, but I can decide my actions as a result of that environment.
Yeah.
And I can choose to take a positive, even if it's a small positive. Or I
might have frozen there for a second.
choose to take a negative. But I know, so if you take a small positive, you're likely to get a good outcome. Or a positive, you'll get a positive outcome. If you take a negative, you'll get a negative outcome.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of concept for me in karma, and things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
The reason is you've done something to make it happen. Yeah. Or whatever, even if it's something bad, right? You still got to say, well, I can dwell on it, and it can always be bad for the rest of my life, or I can set myself free, right? That kind of prisoner thing, I can get out.
Yeah, great. Hey, let's talk about your upbringing in your early days, because in the book you talk about the fact that that was fairly formative for you. It wasn't always easy. Things weren't served up to on a silver platter in terms of your environment and maybe your parenting a little bit and those sorts of things. So I think it's fair to say you found yourself in that prisoner mindset for a while, didn't you? And so what was the background to that, and what was the catalyst for the shift at an early age?
Yeah, well, first of all, the book is split into two parts. It's my life story from my early childhood onwards. And the second part is my leadership lessons and a lot of the things we did to create the right environment for large teams of people. But my life story starts off, and you're right, Paul, I certainly had a very challenging upbringing. I come from Manurewa, South Auckland, low socioeconomic area. And I come from a pretty dysfunctional family. They definitely were. And that happens when your father and your mother both marry 3 times each. And my father, my mother left my father when I was very young because of infidelity. And I went to live with her originally, but didn't return to the family with my 2 older brothers and my father until I was 5 years old. And my mother sent me back because she was getting married and moving to Australia. So originally I had this kind of feeling of abandonment, I suppose, originally. And then I went into my father's environment, and he was, I suppose, he was a classic Kiwi male. He loved rugby, racing and beer, but he had another trait he wanted to add. He was randy, eh? He was a bit like, he was like a rooster in a hen house. But anyway, he was also very abusive, and abusive physically, but more damaging mentally. Yeah. And whenever he saw me, he just saw red. And I was the little boy that came back, and I think he took it out on me particularly because he saw in me the hurt that he had from my mother leaving him. And so he told me and belittled me a lot mentally and told me I'd be no good. He told me I'd be a loser. And so I felt like I was trapped in that environment, and it was a prison. And so I needed to break out. I mean, if not, I was doomed, really. And I suppose there were 3 key factors that changed. The first one is my father wasn't around a lot, and that was good because when he was abusive or drunk, both at the same time. And so he never went anywhere. He never went to the school. He never went to the sports, and he never went to family and friends. And what I found was being part of groups in different environments. So going to school, right? I love school. As we got to play. And I think we learned something along the way, but we certainly played and made lots of friends. And that created sport. And sport was fantastic. I excelled at that, and I loved it. And I created many friends. Now, I started to figure out very quickly, right? And this is a young age, very young age, 10, below 10, that if I was in someone else's environment, I felt great. I felt loved. I felt happy. But when I was in my home environment, I felt bad. And so I knew, why would I want to stay in that environment? So I knew I had to get out. And that kind of forced me to get out. And so the second thing that helped me was finding love. And I found my wife when I was 16. I married her a few years later. We've been married 40 years. And, I found love early, and because I needed it. I needed somebody to love, and I needed someone to love me. And so it's been fantastic. I mean, I've got 2 wonderful daughters and 3 beautiful grandchildren. And that's what my life's about. And I never forget that. But the third most important thing is work. I found that if you did something for other people, they paid you, which is great. And so I went to work because I thought this is great. But at work, I learned so much, right? I went more at work than I ever did at school. I got taught theories, models, systems, behaviours. I learned how to operate in an environment. I learned leadership. It was bloody fantastic. And we worked hard, we played hard, and work set me free. Love set me free, work set me free. And it's been fantastic. I mean, as you say, I was an apprentice butcher. I left school at fourth form, end of fourth form. I learned more, but I've been lots of mentors and coaches that have helped, and programs that have helped develop me. And it's been a wonderful journey. And I ended up over 47 years in retail in New Zealand and Australia. And last 18 years as the senior exec team at Woolworths New Zealand. And it's been a fantastic journey. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for those opportunities, including my early childhood, because without that purpose of getting out of that environment and creating a better life for me, it never would have happened. So
yeah, it's a fantastic and empowering story. And I see Michelle is just publicly just saying, love your vulnerability, Brett. Thank you, and of course, this is something that we, I guess in the early days of your career, and certainly when I was, starting out, coming up, you didn't do that in the work environment. You didn't show that vulnerability.
Oh, shit, no.
So the world is changing, but it's changing because of people like you. So it's fantastic. And you've just reinforced to me I think the comments I made at the outset, which is just this appetite to learn, which is just stuck with you from day one right through, and you're on the verge of retiring and stuff, but you've still got your ears and your mind and your eyes open, and you're looking to learn and seeing how you can develop further and what new knowledge you can take on board. So that's fantastic.
Sorry, Paul. Knowledge is power, but the power comes from sharing the knowledge with others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just pick up on a question now from from Greg. So Brett, do you find that people get promoted to a level that they are incompetent, and how do you deal with that? That's a classic conundrum. I think
I missed that little bit.
So the situation where people can get promoted above a level to a level where they're no longer competent, beyond their capability, and how do you deal with that?
I think that's a good question, but I don't necessarily agree. You see, I have this belief that people are competent. The reason they become incompetent is because they've either lost self-confidence or they have been misguided. And, it's fair to say that, everyone can say, you get to a point where you're comfortable, right? And what are you comfortable doing? And the moment you step into something you're not comfortable, people call that incompetence. But you have to you can find a way to be competent.
Yeah.
Like any of us can do. You're not born a leader. You're created. You're created by your attitude to learn and develop and grow. And so if you're feeling incompetence or others feel that you're incompetent, it's because you lack the confidence to continue to learn, continue to change and grow. And but it does mean that you do get people in there that to answer that question. So I can't see that.
We just missed that last comment, Brett. You just froze there, and I think it was an important one. So maybe just repeat that, just the last few seconds.
Well, the issue is that you feel that you can do it, but what I was saying was that you have somebody who wants to achieve something, and they know they can, but they lack the confidence to do that. That was my key point, I think, Paul.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, as you say, you promoted into a new role, higher or different. There's always a stretch there, isn't there? There's always should be always an element of growth there, and as you say, you've got to have that sort of mindset. And also,
Yep.
look what sort of support you can wrap around in those circumstances as well, and give it a good crack. I'm just going to pick up and go back to another question which Stephen had posted previously, which was, and he's referring back to the David Peak model again. So he says, you've spoken about survivors, prisoners, and whingers, but what tips do you have for keeping the volunteers in that space and motivated?
It's a big answer. The tip really is, I touched on it before, you have to create belief. They have to want to be there and believe in what you are doing when you are there. And so my biggest tip would probably come from Vince Lombardi. There you go.
Yeah.
And Vince Lombardi is, of course, the American football coach for the Green Bay Packers, who's on the trophy of the NFL Grand Final World Championships.
Yep.
And Vince actually had a famous quote. He said that if I help you look after God, family, then when you come to the Green Bay Packers, you do what Green Bay Packers do, have to help people to look after their personal life so that when they come to work, they can give their full commitment and effort. And leaders don't do that.
Yep.
A lot of leaders don't. They say, oh, well, you come to work, you leave your stuff behind. Because I remember that's what I got told. You leave your shit behind, come to work, do your job, go home, deal with your stuff at home.
Yeah.
But you've got to do more than that now. And that's how you get volunteers. When they know that you believe in them and you will do what you can to assist them in their.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love the Lombardi scenario, and of course that his whole story is captured in a very compelling movie, isn't it? So, okay, let's move on and let's come back to some of the specific challenges you've had in the work environment. I think you're frozen there, Brett. Are you still there?
I'm just back now. I missed everything for the last 30 seconds or 20 seconds.
Well, that's right. I was just filling the gaps in, mate, so it's fine. I was just going to say, let's come back to some of your career challenges as an executive leader. And I'd like to touch on COVID because we were working with you and the team leading up to that. And of course, I don't think any of us saw it coming, right? COVID in early 2020. But clearly hugely disruptive to an organisation like Countdown, an essential business, got to get the food through to New Zealanders. So there's the pressure of that. There's new concerns about safety for your people. Things are changing daily in terms of, as you say, the environment you've got to operate in, government regulation policy and that sort of thing. So you've got to be very reactive and adaptive. So take it. What was it like through those early few weeks and couple of months in terms of leading the organisation, leading the bulk of 18,000 people?
First of all, it's very challenging, and I must say that I have been retired coming up to 2 years, and it's even more challenging now. But what I'd say is that if the leaders have not done their work with their team beforehand, when adversity strikes, it magnifies.
Yeah.
And so, it's no good waiting for adversity and then try and scramble and deal with it. You've got to use the good times when things are better to actually establish the resilience and buoyancy you need when adversity encounters. But I got to say this, right? When I reflect back now, I got to say we were dumb. We were dumb. And the reason we were dumb is we should have seen this coming. I mean, shit, bird flu's been around since 2005. We know when a pandemic is likely to hit us, and yet we didn't do enough. Not only we didn't do enough, with inside business planning, and don't get me wrong, I think we did. The reason we survived in 2020 was because we'd done some work on the team culturally.
Yep.
And they rallied behind us and fixed us. But if we hadn't have done that work, really what was going on, we could have been, as I said, in bloody big trouble. So I think we're a bit underprepared, and I still believe that not enough people spend the time staring into the future for what could happen. And because you don't, you just deal with the events that happen, you get broadsided, sideswiped. And so I think all leaders must spend more time on this and then figure out, well, what's going to happen and what happens if it does. We scrambled well. Our team were magnificent, but the things changed, right? The whole environment changed. And I can only speak now because I think we handled it pretty well. I think except for the first couple of weeks, it was a big shock. But I think we handled it well and got through that first lockdown period and come out the other side. And we started to put some planning together to move forward. But I actually think that my view now is that people aren't doing enough. I mean, and I'm not talking about becoming a protester on the government steps, but I do think from a business point of view, not enough work was done to lobby the government. I mean, the government's come out with guidelines. And all I would say is if I was still in business in the leadership role, in a senior role, I'd be pushing the boundaries on those guidelines. And I don't think New Zealanders and leaders with inside New Zealand have pushed those boundaries hard enough. And so they have just done what they thought they should.
Yeah.
And, if the government tells you that be scared, then who's going to be scared? Everyone. What's the leaders doing to tell their team not to be scared, that we believe in you, we can help you, this is what we're going to do? And it's just it just feels to me that we've accepted and just rolled over on a lot of things that we could have pushed harder on, and a lot of businesses could still be operating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just the view. And it's an outside view, not an inside view anymore.
Yeah, I think looking back on this period of time, there's so much learning for us to take forward, isn't it? And it's really important to continue to delve into that experience from the past and say, well, what, because we've all had successes, we've all had setbacks, and what's the root cause of those? What can we take forward into the future? Let me just ask you a little bit now, because as you pointed out, you'd been doing some work on culture leading up to that. So I think we're specifically talking about in the supply chain aspect. So you had been running the store network for a number of years, and then your new CEO came in and said, we've got a problem in distribution in the supply chain. I want you to take that over as well. And that's when you picked up the phone to us again and said, look, I know what I need to do. I just don't have the resources to do it quickly enough, I think was the comment you made. There was some real problems there, weren't there, in terms of, and what the way that showed up in particular was absenteeism, right? Yeah. On any given day, a huge percentage of people weren't turning up to work, which is tough to run a business, and we felt for the shift managers and team leaders who then spend most of their time trying to scramble around and find people to fill the gaps, so very, very difficult way to run the organization effectively. We did a few things there and managed to, collectively with the team, you guys in particular, and us providing a bit of direction and guidance, and made a big dent in that problem in quite quick time, So the absenteeism went down very, very sharply, and so performance lifted, right? And people felt better about performance as well. But from a leadership point of view, what was the key things for you in terms of taking on that piece of the organisation, seeing the challenge, and how do I move forward, as you say? And you didn't have the benefit of a long time frame to do it.
Yeah, no, we'd transformed the store business as a team over the previous 5 to 8 years. And it took a while. It took a long time to change the way the stores operated. And when I got the opportunity to look at the supply chain, I didn't have that time. mainly because I knew I wasn't going to be there also. But also, too, there was a greater need in our business to fix the supply chain quickly. The stores could take a little bit of time to come right. Now, what I also understood at the time is that you need to recruit expertise or resources to help you if you, and in particular, we never build structure inside organizations to deal with that significant piece of change at speed. And when you stretch existing leadership roles and try and do that, it puts pressure. And so my first bit of advice to leaders is make sure that you utilize the resource that is available to you to help you move forward in a positive way. And the experience with On Brand was fantastic. I mean, we basically were able to turn, which was a pretty bad, broken supply chain at that particular point in time, because we had system failures around a Christmas period just as I took over. And we managed to change it in just over a year. And that is unbelievable in my view. I never expected it. I actually thought we might take 2 or 3. So, and we couldn't have done it without your team, Paul. So, thanks for that. And it was well worth it. But to get to your point around absenteeism, and it comes down to that whole belief thing, the absenteeism that we're now experiencing in our supply chains because of COVID and the stand-down days. But I still feel that the fundamentals involved in how to fix absenteeism, they need to be dealt with. And a lot of people forget that. So it's just, oh, well, COVID's the problem. Remember, it's the event. COVID's the event. So I can't do anything about it. Now, my view is you can. And there's, I suppose in the sheds, we had a plan. And our plan was we have to provide the team in the sheds with a purpose. They have to buy into the purpose. We have to help them believe in that. And so you've got to communicate. And so we had to set up a process of communication. And you have to communicate what a good standard is. See, it's one thing, you talk about absenteeism. You've got people there that don't achieve standard, you've got a problem. And it's unacceptable if you say it takes X time to do something and somebody does it in 80% of that or 70% of that. But it's also unacceptable if they're doing it at 110, 115, because they're likely to be unsafe. But if you get people to understand what the standard is and what good is, they feel good when they do good.
Yeah.
And you need to do that. You've got to find a way. The other key thing is really important in any large operation. Over roster. Forget about bad times. Over roster. So in our environment, we had temps and lots of temps. The problem is the temp would only operate at about 60 or 70% of standard because it takes time.
Yeah.
You need to train and invest. I've got no time to train and invest. Well, if you don't train and invest, you never fix. And so you've got to slow things down, train and invest, over roster. And people go, I can't afford over roster. I bet you if they'd over rostered in the last year, you'd be getting through this or better than they have been.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, you don't pay people enough money, and it kind of leads to the next one. You got to pay people more money. And businesses don't like paying more money. Trust me.
Yeah.
And they've got to pay more money. You've got to find a way to give them some more money so they believe and they know they want to come. Why wait for the unions to take them out on strike to get more money? I mean, how dumb's that? And that's the point, right? So you've got to pay more money. Businesses are losing millions of dollars right at the moment because they can't supply. You'd be better to pay the team more money to make them supply.
Yeah.
And that's right. And the last thing you really got to, well, 2 last things. You've got to recognize them more. It's not just about money. You've got to find a way to help them with their God and their family, especially in the cultural environments of logistics.
Yeah, I think that was a very big key, wasn't it? Because particularly those Auckland sheds, there was a very high proportion of Samoan, Tongan, Maori workers there, right? And their life beliefs are, family, church, then work. And so it goes back to your Lombardi point before. You've got to understand that life environment and what matters to them, and can you support that for them then to feel part of the corporate family. I think the other thing, Brett, was you've touched on this, but making them believe. And one of the things that struck me is that from an executive level, in terms of how we communicate and how we make stuff relevant to people, requires real thought, and I'll give you an example from the work that we did in the UK with the big supermarket chain there. In parallel to the work we were doing, they were implementing a high performance coaching system into the organization, led by a guy that had developed the coaching for the British Olympic cycling team, And their model started with, you've got to have a singular focus. What is that? What is the equivalent of winning the gold medal at the next Olympics in 4 years' time? And that was the mantra, So, of course, they worked that up with the senior leaders within the supermarket environment. And they all said, well, that gold medal is simply sales, higher sales, right? And, of course, that's great. They bought into that, and they're incentivized around that. They're motivated around that. But when you translated that into the store, for example, where you've got sort of people working after school and part-time, people who've got lots going on in their lives, it just doesn't work, does it? And they don't connect with that. So you had to find a way to connect them with the same outcome, but in a different way. And so what we would try and do is, for example, get the butcher in the meat department to look beyond the transaction of the meat and imagine the steak on the plate, and what might go with the steak, and if you recommended some parsley potatoes, that would put another pound in the basket, and suddenly you've got your 3% sales lift happening. So, but you had to be able to relate it in a way which made sense for them, and they felt they were able to easily contribute to it, and felt good about it. I felt like they were making a difference. That's a little bit from me, but back to you, and I'll come back. So Christian has got a question here. So this is a more personal one. So what habits do you utilize to move yourself from a surviving quadrant to a thriving quadrant? There are a lot more external challenges, COVID, inflation, negative media present at the minute, which can get in the way of having a clear vision.
Well, for the last 35 years, I've developed a life planning process, and Paul touched on it. And I'm very, very dedicated, committed, and structured in that. And so I'm very clear on what my purpose in life is and what part I play, what role I play. I'm very clear on the goals that I want. I'm very clear on my objectives to achieve those goals and the action plans to achieve those goals. And then, just like in business, I monitor them. And so if something happens that has actually set me aside, I go back and reinforce why. Why am I here? What am I trying to achieve? What's happened? How can I adjust to that? And like I said, there's nothing wrong with actually, it's not getting wrong, but it happens to us. Each of us get a little disjointed or despondent as a result of some of the environmental stuff that affect us. But if you come back and then recenter and recheck why you're here and what you're trying to achieve, and you take a positive affirmation on that and re-look at it, you find that you come out of it very quickly. But I have a routine of meditation, chanting, affirmations, and then I reward myself when I achieve. And really, really important, right? Because no matter how things are, and here's another thing, and it's important for leaders too, Paul. So if we're talking about personal, And I think leaders forget this. No matter how hard things or difficult things are, find a bloody way to have some fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find a way to have a laugh, for God's sake. And you just got to let some stuff go. And what happens is leaders and people get so focused into this trouble, all the trees, they can't see the wood. And so you've got to just relax a little bit, have a laugh, and take things a bit lighter. And leaders have to do that. They have to find a way to make their team laugh. And it must be hard now, but if leaders have forgotten to make their team laugh, then all people will feel is bad.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, and so just to put a little bit of context in that personal planning, I know that every year you spend, a couple of solid days on your personal plan, working through that process again every year, right? Yeah. I know, and you made a comment in which was quite humorous. He says, we're employing people in our strategy department in the organisation, and I'm flabbergasted that they don't have a personal strategic plan, right? They're working on strategic plans constantly for the organisation, but they don't have one for themselves.
So the team have asked, there's some people here asked a few questions, right, Paul? My question to everyone that has taken the time to listen is, do you have a personal plan? And if you don't, then why not? Because you're 100% right, Paul. Was a question I asked a lot of leaders. We ran a personal planning and goal setting workshop for the leaders inside the Woolworths environment. And the whole thing is that as a leader in any business or anything, you spend so much time trying to figure out how to be better, set goals, objectives, plans, and all that. But how much time do you spend on your own purpose? How much time do you spend on yourself? You would never in business actually just carry your goals, your objectives and action plans in your head. You couldn't. And why would you do the same? And that's my question. And that's really where we're at, is I kind of go, you got to spend more time on yourself. If you want to be resilient and buoyant, you want to be confident. And this is why I'm so passionate about these young kids, is because, this mental health issue around the world is a problem. That's because they don't know what they want to do and where they want to go and how to do it. They've got no structure. So if you ask me what I'd like to happen as a result of this, get yourself a personal plan.
Yeah.
Get on with it and start looking at it. And you're right, you've got to measure it just like you do in business. Yeah. And then reward yourself. Buy yourself something new when you do well. Give something away.
And we've clearly got at least one disciple on board, because Heather again, who says she was very lucky to attend your personal planning session, so beneficial for life. So I think that's one of the great things about what you're doing, and also what we feel at On Brand Partners about the work we do, is the value isn't just in the context of people's work, but it is their broader and personal life as well. And when people feel that it's making a difference at that level, it is very purposeful. There's a lot of meaning and benefit in that, and that's what keeps you going. We've got a few minutes left, so if there are any more questions, let us know. But I just, maybe time to just sort of bring that back to, what would be your advice for young leaders and people starting out today, and in particular, I guess, in this environment now, where in today's world we're all feeling more under pressure, we're stretched, we're time poor. What's the things that you need to be most mindful of or protective of as a leader?
Well, first of all, if you're giving advice to young leaders, my first bit of advice is you don't have to be the MD to make a difference. Leaders, once you become a leader, you've accepted the responsibility to help coach and guide a team of people to achieve a common purpose. All leaders can make a difference. And let me just tell you, after navigating 15 different MDs, they don't last long, those MDs. They don't last very long. But that's my personal experience. But it doesn't matter whether you're the MD, it doesn't matter whether you're the departmental manager, it doesn't matter whether you're the team leader or the supply chain manager or general manager. When you accept responsibility as a leader, you can make a difference. Accept that and be accountable for that and make the difference. Make your mark in the universe. Yeah, and that's kind of it. As a leader, but if you do that, once you do that, the number one thing is communication. So we touched on it quite a bit, right? You got to learn to communicate up and down. You got to listen as well. So communication means you listen. So you got to find a way to communicate. And there's only one way to communicate. I love these webinars, all right? Thank you very much. But you can't beat personal interaction. Yeah. And I think the common mistake now, you know, I would, if I was still in business, in the corporate world, in retail, I'd still be meeting one-on-one with every person I could. Yeah. And I'll tell you why, is because you cannot beat that connection. It's a failure of a leader. The moment you stop to do it, you'll lose belief. And so communication to me, especially personal communication, is the key.
Right. I know you've got your 7 lessons. We probably haven't got time to get through all of those now, and that's a segue for, I think, for people to sort of put their names down on the list for the books. But Michelle, who I know has worked with you for a number of years, she's got one final question, which it comes in 2 parts. She says, "Been privileged to being coached directly and indirectly from your leadership. At the start of the webinar, you mentioned you wanted to give back to people, and this needed to be your family first. So the question comes in 2 parts. Outside of time, what did you give back to your family? And if you could turn back time 20 years, what would you do differently in your work rhythm that wouldn't drain the family time bank account?"
Wow.
Tough one, isn't it? Hey?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing is it's been wonderful to spend more time with the family, of course, since I've retired. And the one lesson I've learned is that I should have spent more time with my children. I was more focused on the material things. As I said, I was focused on myself and being the best person I could be for myself. That would give me monetary gains to give me the joy I thought I had. But you know what? You don't need money to have joy. And I figured that out. That's why I don't work anymore. And the issue really comes down to the fact that, you know, the joy comes from that communication, that time together. And if I had my chance again, I would have turned down some of the meetings that I thought I should have been at that didn't make a shit of a difference. Spend some time with my family.
Right, great, thanks, Brett. And my apologies, apparently that question actually came from Sean. So, so thanks very much, Sean. That was a great area to end on. So, look,
so Brett, couldn't Sean get the book then?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so all right, the first book's off to Sean. We just need to make sure we get his details so that we can get that to him in a couple of months' time. Brett, our time's sort of wrapping up now, so thank you very much. It's been fantastic, and I concur with the audience in terms of your vulnerability, your, being open and pragmatic. You've just reinforced what a human-led leader that you really are. I'll leave you to make one final comment, because I'm sure we all wish you well with the My Purpose venture and the work that you want to do with those young New Zealanders, those young people. What's one thing that we all might be able to help in regards to that? What could we do to help you in that direction?
Sometime in the future, somebody you know will have a senior student looking to attend a life planning course. Sign off, yes.
Right. All right. Simple as that. Thank you. It's great to see you active on LinkedIn. That's so you're making some great comments there. So we'll all be able to keep up to speed with where you're at with both the book and My Purpose. So wish you all of the best. If there's anything that we can do to support you in that ambition, then we'd love to do that. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I know we had one or two little hiccups with the with freezing and stuff, but we hope that you've got a lot of value from this. I certainly have. The webinar will be available, and we'll have an edited version in time as well to just pull out the real nuggets and things. So thank you very much, everyone, but mostly, Brett, thank you to you.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you very much for putting this on. I'm very grateful to have the opportunity and to share my story with you all. Thank you.